Welcome back to the deep dive. For most writers, getting to that point of instant global literary superstardom, that's the peak.
That's the goal, right?
Exactly. It usually means a quiet, sort of gilded life. You focus on the next book, you give some measured lectures, you accept the awards. But our subject today, Susanna Arundhati Roy, she did the exact opposite.
She really did. She took that massive platform, all the intellectual and, financial capital that comes from winning something like the Booker Prize, and deliberately traded it.
Traded it for what, though?
For a life defined not by fiction, but by relentless, often really confrontational political warfare. It is, genuinely one of the most remarkable and, frankly, expensive pivots in modern literary history.
Absolutely. The moment she was established as this global literary figure, she basically decided her best work wasn't going to be another novel.
No.
It was going to be direct, uncompromising critiques of power, whether she was taking on India's huge dam projects, American foreign policy, or the very foundations of global capitalism itself.
So today, we're deep diving into the life and work of Arundhati Roy, a writer who got the highest praise, only to use that platform to, in her own words, scream from the bloody rooftops.
Our mission today is to unpack the sources, to really get a handle on this journey. It's such a rare blend of literary genius and just absolute moral certainty.
Yeah, we need to trace her development from an architecture student through that meteoric rise as a novelist, and then really analyze why. Why did she pivot so intensely to being a political activist and this necessary, very controversial critic of power?
We're looking at a figure who consciously rejected literary celebrity. She rejected the comforts that came with it to focus on human rights, on environmental causes, and on exposing what she sees as institutional hypocrisy.
The big picture here is examining the true price of dissent. When you have a voice that's so unique, it can't be ignored.
Even when that leads to sedition charges and years of legal pressure.
Right. So we'll start with her background, which is highly unique, and the explosion of her first novel. Then we'll get into the decades of fiery essay writing, where she took aim at everything from nuclear policy to the very meaning of freedom.
Okay, let's unpack this journey, starting from her very unconventional roots.
So she was born Susanna Arundhati Roy on November 24th, 1961, in Shillong.
Which, at the time, was part of undivided Assam. It's now in Meghalaya. And what's instantly fascinating and maybe formative is just the sheer diversity and movement in her family background. Geographically, religiously, right from the start.
That diversity is absolutely crucial. You can't understand her work without it. It's this cosmopolitan, yet somehow intensely rooted perspective that defines everything she writes.
Born into a Christian family, but her heritage spans these major cultural divides in India.
Right. Her mother, Mary Roy, was a renowned Malayali Christian women's rights activist. She was from Aymanam in Kerala, which becomes a key location in her fiction.
And her father, Rajib Roy, was a Bengali Christian tea plantation manager from Kolkata.
So you've got this mix, Bengali, Malayali, Christian, and a fiercely political mother who was defying conventions herself. It must have shaped a deeply independent, critical worldview from very early on.
Yeah, definitely not a conventional, settled background. Her parents divorced when she was only 2, and she and her brother moved around a lot with their mother between Udi and Kerala.
Exactly. She went to school in Kottayam, then later the prestigious Lawrence School in Tamil Nadu. And this early mobility, combined with her mother's own legal and social battles, it really seems to have ingrained a skepticism toward any kind of entrenched social norm.
And then that early instability gives way to her formal education in Delhi, where she studied architecture at the School of Planning and Architecture, or SPA.
And it's in Delhi that she meets her first husband, an architect named Gerard Bacuna. They married in '78, lived in Delhi and Goa before separating in '82.
Later, she married the independent filmmaker Pradeep Krishan in 1984. The sources say they collaborated a lot on film projects.
They did. And though they live separately now, they seem to have this reflective partnership, which just continues that kind of defiantly unconventional approach she has to her personal life.
That background in architecture school, it proved to be directly useful. Her initial career wasn't novels, which might surprise a lot of people.
No, her first creative outlet was film. She worked in television. She even starred in a film called Masi Sahib in 1985. But she also wrote screenplays for 2 films directed by Pradeep Krishan.
The first was Electric Moon in 1992, and the other was In Which Annie Gives It Those Ones back in '89.
And it was that second one, Annie, which was semi-autobiographical. It was based on her own experiences as an architecture student, and that's what won her the National Film Award for Best Screenplay in 1988.
So even before The God of Small Things, she already had this national platform. She had recognition for her writing.
Yes, and what's fascinating here is that even in the pretty small world of Indian cinema, you can see that ferocious critical streak that defines her later nonfiction.
All right, this comes out in 1994 when she gets a lot of attention for this scorching film review, The Great Indian Rape Trick. She's criticizing Shekhar Kapoor's internationally acclaimed film, Bandit Queen.
Okay, let's unpack this moment because it's such a brilliant early marker of her future moral framework. What was the core of her critique?
Her critique wasn't about the acting or the direction. It was.
Mm-hmm.
It was fundamentally about exploitation.
Exactly, and the moral right of the artist. The film is based on the life of Phoolan Devi, the famous bandit and rape survivor. Roy charged the director, Kapoor, with exploitation. She questioned the fundamental right to restage the rape of a living woman without her permission.
Ah,
She basically argued that Kapoor had misrepresented Devi's life and sensationalized this immense personal trauma for, commercial gain and cinematic spectacle.
that is a stunning precursor to her later work. She's challenging the accepted ethics of creative power, the right of the powerful, whether they're filmmakers or governments, to use the trauma of the vulnerable for their own purposes.
It connects her early film critique directly to her later political work. The theme is so consistent, the moral accountability of those in power. She just challenged it head on.
That sets the stage perfectly for the literary explosion that came next. It's really hard to overstate the impact of The God of Small Things in 1997. It was an international phenomenon.
It really was. She started writing it in 1992, living in, relative poverty, writing it longhand in the back of a van.
And completed it 4 years later in 96. The book is semi-autobiographical, drawing so heavily on her childhood in Imanam, Kerala. It tells this sprawling, intimate story of fraternal twins, political conflict, forbidden love.
And its publication in 1997 was this immediate seismic event. It just catapulted Roy to international fame.
The commercial success was huge, and it was immediate. She got an astronomical publishing advance of £500,000. For a debut novel from a pretty unknown author, that was just unprecedented.
It was a massive vote of confidence. It secured her financial independence almost instantly. By the end of June 97, just weeks after it came out, the book had been sold in 18 countries.
It became the biggest-selling book by a non-expatriate Indian author. That's a major milestone in itself. Commercially, it was a phenomenon, but critically, the reception was a lot more complex and controversial, especially back home.
Let's look at that. The sources show the U.S. reception was wildly favorable. The New York Times listed it as a notable book of the year. Critics like Michiko Kakutani called it a dazzling first novel.
At once so morally strenuous and so imaginatively supple.
But this is where it gets really interesting because the UK and India had much more mixed reactions. The Booker Prize win itself in 97 caused this immediate internal controversy. One of the 1996 Booker judges, Carmen Khalil, actually called the novel execrable.
Execrable. Wow.
Yeah, so it suggested this deep divide among the literary establishment. But then the outrage shifted from just aesthetic criticism to actual legal action in India.
I remember the obscenity charges being incredibly high profile.
Oh, yeah. In her home state of Kerala, the political establishment was just outraged. The chief minister at the time, E.K. Nayanar, he specifically criticized the book's unrestrained description of sexuality.
And that led to her having to answer charges of obscenity under the Indian Penal Code, which is a serious matter. It could have meant jail time.
The irony is just palpable, isn't it? She's being celebrated globally for her literary genius, and at the same time, she's being charged at home for immorality.
Does this constant legal and political pressure just fundamentally change the kind of writer she becomes?
I think it has to. It cements her identity. She wins one of the world's most prestigious literary awards for a book, the Booker citation, called One That Keeps All the Promises That It Makes.
While simultaneously facing criminal charges in her home state over that very same book.
It immediately defined her platform not just as a global novelist, but as a dissident under fire. The Booker Prize was the moment she gained a kind of global immunity and this huge platform to say what she wanted.
And she used that platform not to hide, but to speak even louder.
And to target the very systems that were trying to silence her.
That explosion and the controversy that followed, it sets up her definitive career shift perfectly. The sources confirm that since that 97 novel, Roy has dedicated almost all of her time, nearly 20 years, to political activism and nonfiction.
earning her the description of being a renegade from the literary world.
It was a clear, conscious choice and a very expensive one, professionally speaking.
Oh, hugely. She could have written another major novel right away, consolidated her fame, her wealth, become the fictional voice of her generation. Instead, she became this prolific, highly focused nonfiction writer and activist.
And she quickly grew into a major voice for the anti-globalization movement.
And her philosophical targets are enormous. She's not just attacking small, local issues. She's a vehement critic of neo-imperialism, of U.S. foreign policy, and maybe most radically, she takes on the fundamentals of modern economic theory itself.
That's the deepest, most challenging part of her philosophy. She opposes industrialization and this mantra of, unfettered economic growth.
In her collection, Listening to Grasshoppers, she described economic growth as being encrypted with genocidal potential.
That is a startlingly radical statement. How does she defend that claim, that economic growth equals genocide?
For Roy, the defense lies in the direct, measurable human cost of that growth in places like India. She argues that development requires massive resource extraction, these huge industrial projects, privatization.
Which inevitably leads to the forced displacement of millions of poor, often advocacy or indigenous populations.
Exactly. Their culture, their livelihoods, their very existence are erased in the name of GDP growth. And she views this systemic erasure, this sacrificing of millions for the benefit of a corporate elite, as a quiet, encrypted form of genocide.
The economic model itself is inherently destructive to people and the environment, in her view.
And she certainly didn't shy away from domestic critiques either. Almost immediately after the Booker win, she confronted one of the most sensitive topics in Indian geopolitics: nuclear weapons.
Right. In response to India's nuclear tests in Pokhran, she wrote The End of Imagination in 1998.
It was a direct, forceful, and deeply moral critique of the government's nuclear policies. She argued that the state was using the bomb as a form of cultural validation, a way of announcing India's arrival on the world stage, but at a horrifying cost. She called the bomb the most totalitarian thing.
Because once used, it spares no one, it destroys everything, it negates the future.
And this critique was later published in her collection, The Cost of Living, where she also expanded her focus to oppose large hydroelectric dam projects, a cause that, as we'll see, would completely dominate her activist life and lead to her first major brush with imprisonment.
She has such an impressive output of nonfiction. This isn't just occasional commentary. She's built a substantial analytical body of work documenting these critiques, and she uses that same powerful, often poetic language that made her famous.
It's the sheer volume and commitment that defines her. I mean, you look at the titles of her collections: The Algebra of Infinite Justice, War Talk, the huge collection My Seditious Heart. The titles alone show the direction she took.
Away from the fictional worlds of childhood and toward justice, war, and dissent.
It is worth saying, though, that after almost 2 decades of advocacy, she did publish a second novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, in 2017.
Which proves she hadn't abandoned the literary world entirely.
No, and that novel was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize. It confirmed her enduring literary power. But even in its sprawling structure and its cast of marginalized characters, trans people in Delhi, Kashmiri separatists, that novel draws directly on the political and social issues she spent 20 years fighting for.
The activism became the setting, the characters, the central conflict of her fiction.
Before we move on to the actual battle she fought, I think her stated influences are so fascinating.
It's a true blend of high literature and political engagement, which really helps explain the texture of her essays.
Yeah, she cites canonical writers like Shakespeare, James Joyce, alongside powerful political voices like James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, and the magical realism of Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
And she said she learns from everybody, including imperialists, sexists, friends, lovers, oppressors, revolutionaries.
Which suggests her goal isn't just ideological purity. It's about comprehensive, nuanced understanding. She's absorbing the whole messy human condition to inform her critiques.
So the novelist's skill, the ability to craft beautiful, resonant language,
is merged with the activist's moral certainty. She gained the tools of the artist, but consciously chose to deploy them on the front lines of political struggle.
Now we get into the core of her activist career.
Yeah.
Direct, high-stakes confrontation with the Indian state. The defining domestic battle for Roy was the fight against the Sardar Sarovar project, this immense hydroelectric dam on the Narmada River.
This project was her initial litmus test. It really encapsulated everything she opposed. Massive centralized industrialization, the displacement of hundreds of thousands of marginalized people,
With little compensation.
then devastating environmental destruction, all in the name of this questionable national progress. She campaigned alongside prominent activists like Mehta Patkar and the Narmada Bachao Andolan movement.
She argued the dam would displace 500,000 people, often indigenous advocacy communities, and would ultimately fail to deliver its projected benefits. But her opposition wasn't just verbal. She backed it with a serious personal financial commitment.
That's right. The sources tell us she donated her Booker Prize money, which was substantial, plus royalties from her books on the dam issue directly to the movement.
This is a crucial point. She was sacrificing immense personal wealth for a cause, showing her activism wasn't just performance.
And this commitment brought her directly into conflict with the highest court in the land, leading to that highly publicized contempt of court case in 2002.
Well, what happened there?
Well, Roy was accused of disrupting proceedings related to the dam. The Supreme Court issued a contempt notice against her. Her response, in an affidavit, was explosive. She didn't offer an apology or a legal justification. She launched a counterattack.
What specifically did she say that provoked the court to find her in contempt?
She essentially accused the court of demonstrating a disquieting inclination to silence criticism and dissent. She pointed out the irony that the court was pursuing contempt proceedings against her based on a potentially flawed petition, while at the same time refusing to investigate serious corruption allegations in military contracting deals, citing a case overload.
So she didn't just accept the charge, she charged back, accusing the judiciary itself of institutional bias.
Absolutely. And the court found her guilty of criminal contempt. The sentence was called symbolic. 1 day's imprisonment and a fine of about 2,500 rupees.
Which is about 30 or 40 US dollars.
Right. And crucially, she refused to apologize. She served the jail sentence and paid the fine, establishing her reputation as someone willing to pay the physical price for her critique.
But this high-profile activism also attracted intense criticism from her peers, specifically over her style. The environmental historian Ramachandra Guha, for example, criticized her advocacy as hyperbolic and self-indulgent with a shrill, hectoring tone.
And this leads us to one of her most famous and defining quotes. Her response to Guha was, "I am hysterical. I'm screaming from the bloody rooftops, and he and his smug little club are going, shh, you'll wake the neighbors. I want to wake the neighbors. That's my whole point."
That perfectly encapsulates the difference between polite, acceptable dissent and the radical confrontation Roy favors. She believes polite dissent has failed, so screaming is required.
Exactly. The stakes are just too high for measured academic critique. She sees these as humanitarian emergencies requiring an urgent emotional response.
This confrontation with the state then escalated even further over the highly sensitive issue of Kashmir, leading to the most serious charges against her, sedition.
This political firestorm started back in 2008 when she explicitly supported Kashmiri independence. She cited these massive demonstrations that year where something like 500,000 people rallied in Srinagar.
And she argued that these rallies were a clear democratic sign that Kashmiris desired secession from India, not union.
This statement caused immediate and widespread political backlash. The major political parties asked her to withdraw her irresponsible statement.
But she doubled down. In 2010, she was charged with sedition by Delhi police, along with a separatist leader, for an anti-India speech at a convention.
And her specific controversial quote, which was the basis of the charge, was, "Kashmir has never been an integral part of India. It is a historical fact. Even the Indian government has accepted this."
We should probably convey the gravity of a sedition charge to the listener. What does that actually imply?
Sedition is defined as encouraging disaffection against the government. This is a colonial-era law that carries the potential for life imprisonment. For a writer, being charged with sedition is the ultimate challenge to free speech.
And here's where we see the immense ongoing significance. The sources confirm that the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the UAPA, was specifically invoked against them in June 2024.
Nearly 14 years after the original speech.
What's the significance of invoking the UAPA?
The UAPA is an anti-terror law. It's extremely stringent. It allows for extended custody without bail, and it puts the burden of proof heavily on the accused. The fact that the state is resurrecting a decade-old charge and applying the severe anti-terror law shows the long shadow her political statements cast.
And the state's continued willingness to prosecute public critics. She also consistently raised questions about sensitive security cases, like the 2001 Indian Parliament attack and the trial of Muhammad Afzal Guru.
Yes. Regarding Afzal Guru, who was convicted in that attack, she alleged state complicity and pointed out what she called irregularities in the judicial process leading up to his hanging. She called his execution a stain on India's democracy.
This stance, questioning the integrity of the state security apparatus and the judiciary, is one of the most polarizing aspects of her work.
It is. Her defense is always that the novelist's job is to see beyond the official narrative. She views transparency and due process as the core protections of democracy, and when the state wavers, she believes she must speak up.
We also see her immediate, visceral reaction to violence against marginalized communities, the Muthanga incident in 2003.
Yes, a land occupation by an advocacy group that resulted in the death of a participant and a policeman. After visiting the jailed leaders, she wrote a blistering open letter to the chief minister of Kerala.
Her message was stark and uncompromising.
You have blood on your hands. This is her style. Not just commenting from a distance, but engaging directly with human tragedy and using moral language to indict those in power.
Moving into contemporary politics, her critiques of the current government, led by Narendra Modi, are equally direct. She called his nomination as prime minister in 2013 a tragedy.
She has also argued that Modi has established a degree of control over India that is, unrecognized in the West, saying that every institution has fallen in line.
And during the height of the pandemic in 2021, her commentary on the government's response to COVID-19 was incredibly harsh.
Yes, in an article for The Guardian, she didn't mince words. She described the government's handling of the pandemic as a crime against humanity.
Her political confrontation even extends to encouraging civil disobedience. In 2019, she urged people to mislead authorities during the enumeration for the National Population Register, or NPR.
And this is a complex but crucial point. The NPR is basically the first step toward creating the National Register of Citizens, the NRC.
The NRC requires people to provide proof of citizenship and ancestry, and critics fear it could lead to millions, especially poor Muslims who lack documents, being declared non-citizens.
Exactly. Roy saw the NPR data collection as a database for the exclusionary NRC. So by calling for people to mislead authorities, give fake addresses, refuse to cooperate, she was encouraging active resistance.
For which she was charged with a police complaint.
Yes, but she clarified her intent, calling it civil disobedience with a smile. Her protest was nonviolent but absolutely active.
Roy's intellectual platform is rarely confined to India. She quickly used her international standing to become a major critic of global power, specifically U.S. foreign policy, right after 9/11.
Her 2001 piece in The Guardian, The Algebra of Infinite Justice, is this seminal piece of anti-war literature. She responded to the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan by saying the bombing was not revenge for New York and Washington. It is yet another act of terror against the people of the world.
Here's where she uses that powerful literary device, referencing Orwellian doublethink to challenge the rhetoric used by President Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair.
Right. When they claim to be peaceful nations fighting a just war, Roy delivered that unforgettable retort. Pigs are horses, girls are boys, war is peace.
She was calling out the fundamental hypocrisy.
Then she used historical examples, listing the countries the U.S. had bombed or been at war with since World War II, disputing the core claim of America being a peaceful and freedom-loving nation.
If we connect this back to her foundational critiques, she sees the war on terror not as an isolated incident, but as a symptom of a larger disease.
American-style corporate capitalism and empire. That's her ultimate synthesis. She argues that in America, the arms industry, the oil industry, the media, foreign policy, they're all controlled by the same business combines. For her, it's not driven by ideals. It's driven by a corporatized empire seeking profit.
She continued this critique during the build-up to the Iraq War, delivering that powerful 2003 speech, Instant Mix Imperial Democracy, Buy One, Get One Free.
In that speech, she described the U.S. as a global empire that derives its legitimacy directly from God, suggesting this self-righteous, unchallengeable moral authority. Her ultimate rejection came in 2006, when she publicly called President George W. Bush a war criminal during his visit to India.
So how do we distinguish between genuine political critique and the kind of inflammatory hyperbole like calling a sitting president a war criminal that risks damaging her credibility?
That is the central dilemma of her career. For her audience, who are often marginalized groups or anti-imperialist academics, this hyperbole is seen as necessary truth-telling.
Matching the severity of the language to the severity of the perceived crimes.
Exactly. Critics, however, argue it pushes her outside the realm of serious political discourse and lets opponents dismiss her as just hysterical, but she seems perfectly willing to accept that trade-off.
Her advocacy extends fiercely into the Middle East as well, particularly Israel and Palestine.
In 2006, she co-signed a letter calling the Lebanon War a war crime and accusing Israel of state terror. More recently, during the 2021 crisis, she defended Hamas's rocket attacks, citing the right to resistance against what she views as illegal occupation.
And in December 2023, she made a very pointed statement about global silence on the conflict.
She stated, "If we say nothing about Israel's brazen slaughter of Palestinians, we are complicit in it." For Roy, silence is not neutrality. It's an active endorsement of the status quo. In 2024, she joined thousands of writers in an open letter pledging to boycott Israeli cultural institutions.
Interestingly, this fierce drive to contextualize conflict sometimes places her at odds with other major literary voices. Her comments after the 2008 Mumbai attacks provoked one of the most intense pushbacks of her career, specifically from Salman Rushdie.
They absolutely did. Roy argued that the attacks had to be understood in the context of wider historical issues. Poverty, the trauma of the 1947 partition, the 2002 Gujarat violence, and the ongoing Kashmir conflict.
She did explicitly state that nothing can justify terrorism, but figures like Salman Rushdie strongly criticized her remarks. What was the core of his critique?
Rushdie argued that linking terrorism to socioeconomic or historical grievances, even if you preface it with "nothing can justify," inevitably sounds like an attempt at moral justification.
Or at least a deflection of responsibility.
Exactly. He implied she was sacrificing moral clarity for intellectual context. The Indian writer Tavleen Singh called her comments the latest of her series of hysterical diatribes against India.
Roy's defense has always been that if you ignore the historical wounds, you can never truly understand, let alone solve, the violence that erupts from them. Her contextualization is meant to be diagnostic, not an excuse.
That's the crux of her methodology. She believes true justice requires addressing the root causes, which for her are systemic poverty and state oppression.
We see her applying this same critical lens to other regional conflicts, like the civil war in Sri Lanka.
In 2009, she called for international attention to what she described as a possible government-sponsored genocide of Tamils in Sri Lanka, and she controversially described the IDP camps as concentration camps.
But she maintained a complex view of the LTTE, which was widely designated a terrorist organization. She didn't whitewash their actions.
No, she didn't. She acknowledged that the LTTE's fetish for violence was cultured in the crucible of monstrous racist injustice that the Sri Lankan government visited upon the Tamil people. Again, it's that insistence on connecting the violent action of the non-state actor back to the original source of state injustice.
As we synthesize her career, what stands out is this staggering duality. A writer who is simultaneously one of the most globally celebrated and one of the most legally prosecuted figures in modern literature.
The list of awards is long, and it demonstrates the global impact of her voice. Obviously, the Booker Prize in '97 for The God of Small Things kickstarted everything, but the later awards shifted focus, really validating her role as a dissenting voice.
She received the Lannan Foundation Cultural Freedom Award in 2002.
The Sydney Peace Prize in 2004 for her work in social campaigns and advocacy of nonviolence, which is a fascinating contrast to her screaming style.
The Orwell Award that same year, the Norman Mailer Prize in 2011, Time 100 in 2014, more recently the St. Louis Literary Award and the European Essay Prize.
But the most recent and perhaps most poignant award is the 2024 PEN Pinter Prize. This brings her back to the highest international literary circles, even as she faces renewed legal threats at home.
The prize recognizes a writer who casts an unflinching, unswerving gaze on the world.
And what's fascinating is what she did with the award. She chose to share the prize money, naming the imprisoned British-Egyptian writer Alaa Abd el-Fattah as the writer of courage.
So she transformed a personal accolade into a political statement.
It reinforces her core belief. The best use of her platform is not to bask in the glow, but to amplify the voices of those who have been silenced.
Now contrast that with the awards she deliberately rejected or returned. She refuses to be co-opted.
The first major rejection came in 2006. She was awarded the Sahitya Akademi Award, a major national award in India, for her essay collection, The Algebra of Infinite Justice. She declined it.
And her reason was very clear.
She rejected it in protest against the Indian government violently and ruthlessly pursuing policies of brutalization, militarization, and economic neoliberalization. She viewed accepting it as tacitly endorsing policies she was fighting against.
Years later, she revisited her early career and returned the National Film Award she'd won back in 1989.
She returned that award in 2015 as a specific protest against what she called growing religious intolerance and violence by right-wing groups in India. It just neatly bookends her career.
Looking ahead, the sources tell us her upcoming book is Mother Mary Comes to Me, scheduled for September 2025. This sounds like a significant return to the personal.
It is. It's a memoir focusing on her early years with her mother, Mary Roy, whom she calls my shelter and my storm. Given the immense influence of her mother, a powerful activist in her own right, this memoir promises to be an incredibly insightful look at the origins of her own relentless confrontational spirit.
So after reviewing this incredible life of literary triumph and political trench warfare, what does it all mean for us?
What really stands out when you look at the whole arc of her career is how she embodies this rare, maybe unique combination of profound literary skill and uncompromising political engagement. She got instant celebrity, but consciously chose the harder path.
Her journey is marked by the highest accolades, the Booker, the PEN Pinter Prize,
Yeah.
but also by the most serious legal charges, including contempt of court and sedition charges that linger for over a decade.
For you, the learner, Roy's career teaches us a powerful lesson about the role of the creative voice. That for some, the greatest impact isn't in quiet fiction, but in the direct, noisy confrontation of power. Her work forces us to consider the ethical responsibility of the artist and the price they're willing to pay.
The ultimate takeaway is the choice between calm, accepted criticism and the method she adopted, which she describes as hysteria. If one of the world's most acclaimed writers has to constantly scream from the rooftops, risking imprisonment, terror charges, and public condemnation, what does that tell us about the effectiveness or maybe the futility of polite dissent in the 21st century?
We've seen her quote, "I want to wake the neighbors, that's my whole point." So the provocative thought we'll leave you with is this. In a world that's overwhelmed by noise and rapidly consolidating power, does choosing silence or measured politeness simply become complicity in the status quo? And what price are you willing to pay to wake the neighbors?